turn north of Memorial and gets a little more sparse, both on Western as well as Kelly. We have the rail corridor, which appears in several of the different alternatives, and I'll point those out in just a moment. Capitol OU Health Science Center is skirted by some of the alignments. Also Remington Park, the Adventure District was actually tied in with one of the alignments. Going north on Eastern Boulevard, it's a little sparse until we get back into Edmond, which is probably where some of those corridors do not perform as well. And then of course within Edmond itself, we have the proposed transit center, we have downtown, we have UCO. So those would be the activity centers we are trying to hit there. With that said, I'm afraid to hit it twice and something. Our pure rail corridor, which is N1, performed well as far as economic development. There are some areas that could be called for redevelopment, for economic growth. Not so good on multimodal system, crossing with transit lines and trails and so forth is just not as prevalent in the rail corridor. And of course it's not congested, which would help it in this case too. Regional connectivity is neutral in that aspect because it kind of takes the way in between several of the activity centers that I named. So it does not have a great push. However, with that said, rail corridor is important for this. The two other alignments I would particularly like to call out are N2 and N3. N2 actually has a rail component in N2. It travels on it travels on 4th to Classen, jumps onto the BNSF corridor for a short portion into Edmond, and then continues to UCO. And N3, again, it would take the same initial route, 4th Classen, jump on the old interurban rail right of way, going up on Hefner, Kelly, 2nd, and then to UCO. These two corridors, N2 and N3, would really provide the highest benefit to all of the goals, to all of the objectives that we're trying to reach. And those two corridors, along with the BNSF rail corridor, are the ones that we would recommend to move into a more detailed analysis. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions we have at this point or any feedback.
I have to ask, with N1 not generating any enhancement of the regional center to the area, and yet you're still suggesting moving forward with it?
It goes back to the same regional connectivity goal. If we have rail corridors in all of the alignments and we knit those together, we might get a completely different dynamic. If there might be a lot of traffic that we're not suspecting at this point in time that goes all the way from Edmond down to Norman, does not necessarily have Oklahoma City as the destination in mind. So having the synergy of the different rail corridors is great. This rail corridor did not perform just absolutely negative to where we would have thought, yeah, we would not even want to look at it. It did, of course, not perform as well as some of the other corridors you see, but having the synergy of the different rail corridors within our different corridor alignments would be important to see.
And that's part of the next exercise as well that we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, is when we get into the actual modeling effort where we put the different alignments in and then we look at what are the trips. We're going to also put in some of these stitches, if you will, going to the south, to the east, to the south, all the way to the north, from Edmond all the way to Norman. We can kind of see a little bit more of what the travel patterns are and understand, okay, yeah, if we didn't bring forward that rail connection, then we would potentially miss that link in the modeling piece of it as well.
And for the same reason that Blair had mentioned the rail there, we do have a lot of citizens in Edmond who work in Tinker. So if we've got that ability to stitch together that rail, it could be.
We essentially felt it was too early in the process to be eliminating that as an option. So we wanted to bring that to you and get your feedback.
Could someone discuss the N7 route and why it was excluded?
Oh, the stretch sideways. We are hitting the Adventure District with this particular route. However, I noticed that north of Wilshire Boulevard until we really get to 33rd, it is very sparsely populated. It does not have employment centers, so at this point in time, it does not capture existing population or existing employment, and there is a smaller amount of growth forecasted for that particular area, to where it did not perform. I mean, it did not perform as poorly as some of the other corridors, but trying to keep it to a workable number, yeah.
I could see where you draw that conclusion based on, existing conditions, but it is a very straight line.
That is correct.
And, we always seem to be figuring up ways to not develop northeast Oklahoma City, and I hate to see us eliminate it at this point.
It's also very beautiful.
Yeah.
That it is.
I guess one of the other reasons would be that one of the major trip generators that hits is the medical center. It's already being hit by presumably the east line, but if we want to bring it forward.
That would be my suggestion.
Okay.
Okay.
But there's also a balance between this need to get people from point A to point B as quickly as possible.
So it may not perform that well on the long haul, but we'll see.
The one thing that I would then maybe like to point out is that N2 and N3 are very, very similar in their alignment. When you look at those, I'm going back up. We're comparing the orange and the green line. The diversion is really just north of Hefner, where N3 veers to the east. Is there a particular alignment that you would like better, that you think N7 should be traded for, instead of looking at N2, N3, N7, and then of course at our rail corridor? Because, sure.
So what you're saying is they hit a lot of the same.
They hit a lot of the same, yes.
They do, but and this goes back to the discussion we had at the very beginning, isn't part of the problem if you eliminate either one of them now, you're almost committing yourself to rail in the case of N2 or roadway in the case of N3 and excluding the other. And I know that we said that's not necessarily the case, but in reality, when that one corridor is kind of tracking BNSF, are you kind of
What we have in
committing to that?
N1 is our pure rail option. N2 has a small stretch of BNSF right-of-way. N3 does not, and N7 is purely roadway. Maybe that will help make a distinction between N2 and N3. We definitely want to move forward with the rail option. N7 would offer, kind of in comparison to the South Corridor, a purely roadway option. And then do we want to keep the hybrid, which would be the N2, and take out N3?
Is it actually possible to use just a portion like that?
Depends on right-of-way issues, but
Yeah.
But you would just be using the right-of-way as opposed to the rail?
correct.
Were you aware when you were doing this that the new Social Security building is being relocated? And that is currently on the N3 line, so.
And N3 is almost completely being served except for a little gap between Britain and the Social Security office.
I think, I mean, from a modal perspective, N2 and N3 actually kind of look like streetcar lines, which is actually maybe a little bit non-intuitive, but if you think of streetcars sort of being like rail light on these corridors, that, we're in rail corridor right away, we can go a lot faster. And that technology is capable of doing that, and it could potentially tie in to the downtown streetcar downtown. Now, the issue with streetcar is gonna be some speed issues, especially when you get down that low into downtown, so it's not gonna really serve the long haul as well as something that's, you know, using highway or using the BNSF the whole way. But I think it's something that we wanna bring forward, because, you know, those streetcar alignments may have a little bit of, advantage on cost, because we can assume the downtown portion is already in place. Right?
Well, we also could assume that between CityLink and Metro, that we can take care of those short travel from the commuter rail to those places that are currently being handled.
Right.
Instead of going north and south, go little bits east and west.
It would seem in the thought process, obviously the commuter rail piece is kind of fixed, it's where it is. And if you're gonna do multimodal, it doesn't mean that that has to follow the rail line specifically, but it has to have points at which, north, south, and east, points at which it becomes in close enough proximity that it makes sense to have stations where intermodal will work. As long as they either get cross or they come close, you can make all that work in locations that fit where a station might possibly want to be, which could obviously be an economic boon to those particular areas too. So I don't know that following the BNSF in its entirety makes sense, but it sure needs to be in proximity to whatever route you decide.
Can we move forward? We can call it an alternate tail on the one.
You mean 2 and 3, or?
Yeah, well, I'm saying also, I feel like it's a mode question, as you bring up.
Right.
Yeah.
That it's gonna make more sense to finish it depending on which mode plays out with us, so.
Okay, so what it sounds like we're hearing is adding N7, right? Keeping N1, N2, N3.
Well, I guess the question that Andrea raised that we never really answered was, does it make sense to sort of combine N2 and N3 into one corridor with the understanding that modes might dictate a little
Right.
alternative alignment? And then we are really only talking about that one alignment.
Okay, so N2, N3 hybrid.
Right.
And then I would-
Flexible.
Right.
Right.
I would ask, I mean, I'm not sure of the difference between N5 or 7. Clearly, part of it's on 44 and the other is 23rd, so I'm not sure what Oklahoma City is interested in doing. It's almost, those need to be reevaluated, that section from Eastern and 44 down to 23rd and whatever that may be, may need to be looked at before we totally went with N5 or. Am I correct?
You're saying that.
N5 did not score.
But
nearly
you
as
were
well
talking
as
about
N7.
your adventure district, is that,
She's saying that N7 could, for instance, go down Harrison or,
Right.
I guess.
I see what you're saying, so pass by, go on Harrison, go up to the OU Health Science Center, maybe straddle the Capitol and then move over rather than the way it is routed right now. I see. So use a modified N7, yeah. I see what you're
Sounds like we've left them all up there.
I think 4 and 6 are.
Right. Oh, this is a little low. If I understood you correctly, really what you were asking was to make this go away and make N7 take this turn?
Well, no, actually, but I think that's a very good point, but between 44 and 23rd, what makes that choice? What's the defining, like Remington Park and the zoo are up closer,
Remington Park and the zoo are
Right.
right here.
so
Actually,
There's nothing between,
there's, yeah.
I shouldn't say nothing, there's very little development between 23rd and 44 on that
On
Lincoln
the-
alignment. However, the right-of-way itself lends itself to the potential to attract something. There is, I mean, I think you'll see activity over there though.
There's a golf course.
So we want to take in that little jog across Harrison and then go up?
I mean, it would seem to me this is likely a BRT route. I mean, I don't know if it's fair to jump between those, but it would seem pretty flexible. And I would just take Phil's choice on the consultants and just dial it in based on the ridership and economic development.
Okay, so we'll look at a modified N7, and kind of toggle between, if you will, we'll kind of take a second look at kind of whether it's the, between 23rd and 44, what we're doing. So focusing on that more. Okay?
I know, because
This is something too, when you guys bring this up, when we go, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well, so I'm gonna go ahead and hit on another item, but when we go and have our work groups again, here shortly, we're taking what you guys have given us from alignments, we're gonna adjust things, and we're gonna go to our groups, our work groups, our stakeholder and public work groups, and sit down and kind of go through the same exercise with them and make sure that we get their input and stuff. So we can look at some of these kind of questions that you've got in a little bit more detail with some of those groups in the North work groups, and get some feedback there too to help dial it in a little too. That makes sense. Okay. All right.
let's go, even though we've talked through it, let's go ahead and vote, just so we have it on record here. So,
Yes vote? Yes with modification.
Just say if you want to change something. So E, is that other
If E.
plus hybrid?
if you want hybrid or some sort of a change in whatever else.
So E would be what we've been.
Vote E. On your discussion. Per discussion.
Per discussion, that's right.
Yes on E.
All right.
Wait, got one more.
Go ahead, yeah.
It's just your system, like adding dramatics.
Yeah. 30 seconds away on that last vote.
Right.
All right, last chance, we're about to move forward here.
Only one, sorry.
All right.
All right. Okay, so now Brian, you've pretty much had your whole discussion, but if you want to give us a synopsis quickly, and then maybe we can get, if there's any more discussion in regards to modal analysis.
Right. I mean, obviously, our next step is to start trying to put these into the model and setting them up in the traffic demand model so we can get some ridership numbers. And as I mentioned, the model is blind to mode. So, you know, for instance, if you have this, you know, if you're talking about one alignment and we want to look at light rail versus BRT, let's say, typically BRT stations are a little closer together. You might have a little slightly different operating plans on BRT where you might have a bus that runs as a local route to its, maybe somewhere to its mid-length, and then actually becomes a bus on that corridor. You know, so you can eliminate some transfers that way. So it's a very flexible use of transit. Streetcar typically has very similar station distance between stations like a local bus would. Although I think we are talking, in some of these instances, we're talking a little bit more of a hybrid of, as I mentioned, a light rail light. And then, you know, as always, we want to differentiate between speeds. So, you know, and it doesn't matter what mode, if we're able to find a portion of the corridor where we're taking it out of traffic, then we're going to apply a higher speed on that segment than we would if it's in traffic. And so in traffic, you're really talking about posted speeds with delays put in for station location within the model. So, we have a lot of, and then also we're doing a bus network around it. So we want to kind of take what the current transit system is doing now and sort of meld in some feeder routes into these corridors. So in the south, I think, if my notes are correct, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, we're bringing forward S1, S2, and S3.
No,
guess
S4
that's
modified.
S4 modified.
Yeah.
All right, which is that down at the end. So I think we're looking at commuter rail on S1 only. S2, since we have more opportunity, or we have a greater chance of having the right-of-way on the southern portion of it versus on the northern portion up in Oklahoma City, that we will look at a light rail or streetcar option. Shields Avenue really looks like a pretty good opportunity even for rail. There's quite a bit of space down there, quite a good opportunity for additional development, and so I think it'll look good for both rail alternatives and bus alternatives, and then S4 will be streetcar and BRT. Is everyone kind of on board with that? Did I miss anything? Think we're in good shape. Okay. In the east corridor, did we bring back the, yes we did. So we brought back E1, and that'll be commuter rail. We really do need to think hard about how that gets into downtown and whether or not it does get intertwined with something else. I'll have a little bit of work to do on trying to figure that out. E5, we'll look at both light rail / streetcar alternatives as well as BRT. If we're using streetcar and BRT, BRT, we'll look at having those alternative alignments closer into downtown, where we're using both the northern route as well as, is it Reno? And then E6 is pretty much all street, so we'll go with BRT and streetcar there. No, the model really won't tell the difference. The differentiating factor between those alternatives will be cost, obviously. Everybody, any questions? Did I miss anything? Real sharp. So then, in the north corridor, we have N1, which will be commuter rail. We have the N2, N3 hybrid that might use different alignments depending on what mode we're talking about, and we'll look at light rail options, streetcar options, and BRT options on those. And we'll probably try to do one of each with the caveat that once we get to the locally preferred alternative, we can tweak even alignments to optimize that corridor if it is the one that moves forward. And then a modified N7, or actually let's set both those alignments down on the southern end of it with BRT and streetcar. Any questions, thoughts? You good with that?
And I think the main thing too is, as you mentioned, Brian, when he's saying streetcar, a lot of times it's a modified streetcar where it's streetcar light rail. So you can do short station spacing as you need it when you're in a downtown area, whether that's Edmond, for example, or in Oklahoma City. And then you can stretch out those station spacing and go a lot quicker in between to make it more of a commuter service, if you will, as well. So it gives you a little bit of flexibility as far as that goes. Okay.
Good.
Okay, I think we pretty much covered all of the corridors too. We had a map in there that just kind of shows you how they all kind of lay out together. Of course, it's spun on its side again, which always messes me up. But as you can see here as well, We are trying to look at some of the through movements. A lot of that does happen in the modeling stage because you really start to see where the travel patterns are. So you can start to understand what through movements are really important. But it sounds like you really want to make sure, based on what you all have told us so far, is that you really want to make sure that we don't preclude in the future the ability to kind of connect the whole system up from that standpoint.
I think strategically what we'll do in the model is we'll go ahead and create that connection in any direction with zero penalty for having to make a mode switch, just to see how it plays out. And that'll actually identify patterns that might speak to an interline between the corridors, whichever way we look at it. So we'll do it that way, and that way we're not doing additional model runs just to kind of figure that out, and then we can optimize it later.
Sounds good. Okay. All right, so